Imagine standing in the heart of the ancient world, surrounded by towering shelves filled with scrolls containing knowledge so vast it could reshape civilization. This wasn't just any library, it was the Library of Alexandria, a beacon of human intellect and ambition, where the greatest minds of antiquity gathered to unlock the secrets of the universe. But what if I told you that beneath its legendary reputation lies a web of mysteries, scandals, and groundbreaking discoveries that history barely whispers about? Today, we're stepping into the shadows of this iconic institution to uncover 30 astonishing secrets, some so controversial they've been buried for centuries. Picture the bustling halls where scholars from every corner of the known world raced to share their findings, their voices echoing with ideas that would change everything. Yet, in a twist as dramatic as any epic, this treasure trove of wisdom vanished, leaving behind questions that still haunt us. How much was truly lost when the flames consumed its halls? What hidden breakthroughs might have rewritten history if they'd survived? And who were the shadowy figures behind its rise and fall? This isn't just a story about books and scrolls, it's a tale of power, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge against all odds. From the library's role in shaping science and philosophy to the explosive debates over its destruction, we're peeling back the layers of myth to reveal what really happened inside those walls. You'll discover how its influence stretches far beyond ancient times, touching everything from modern medicine to the very way we understand the stars. So settle in, because this journey isn't just about uncovering the past, it's about reclaiming the lost legacy of one of history's most enigmatic wonders. By the end, you'll see the Library of Alexandria not as a relic of the ancient world, but as a living mystery waiting for you to help piece together its secrets. Ready to step inside, the doors are open. Long before the Library of Alexandria became a legend, it began with a single bold idea, one man's dream to gather the entirety of human knowledge under one roof. That man was Ptolemy I, a general under Alexander the Great who seized control of Egypt after his mentor's death. He envisioned something unprecedented, a universal archive where every book, every scroll, every written thought from every corner of the known world would be preserved. This wasn't just about collecting texts, it was about harnessing the intellectual power of civilizations. Picture Alexandria's bustling harbor in the 3rd century before the Common Era, where ships from Greece, Persia, India, and beyond docked with treasures far more valuable than gold, their manuscripts. Ptolemy's agents would board these vessels not to confiscate spices or silks, but to seize any scrolls they found. The original texts were taken to the library's scriptorium, where scribes worked tirelessly to copy them. The owners received copies in return, while the originals stayed in Alexandria, swelling the library's shelves. Some called this cultural preservation. Others saw it as outright theft, a ruthless but effective strategy to build the greatest repository of knowledge the world had ever seen. Estimates suggest the library housed over 500,000 scrolls at its peak, an unimaginable number for the ancient world. Think of it like this: if every scroll were laid end to end, they could stretch from Alexandria to Athens. But this wasn't just about quantity. Ptolemy's scholars weren't hoarders, they were curators of wisdom. They translated Hebrew scriptures into Greek, compiled Babylonian astronomical records, and archived lost works of philosophy that might have otherwise vanished forever. The library wasn't just a building, it was a living, breathing network of ideas, where knowledge flowed like the Nile itself. And yet, for all its grandeur, the library's origins were as much about power as they were about enlightenment. Ptolemy wasn't just a scholar king, he was a ruler who understood that knowledge was control. By making Alexandria the intellectual capital of the world, he ensured Egypt's dominance. The library became a magnet for genius, attracting thinkers like Euclid and Archimedes, who shaped mathematics and physics right there in its halls. But beneath the pursuit of truth lay a silent struggle between open scholarship and political ambition, between preserving knowledge and weaponizing it. The Library of Alexandria didn't just collect books, it shaped the destiny of civilization itself. But the Library of Alexandria was far more than just a storehouse for scrolls. It was a thriving hub of intellectual innovation thanks to its beating heart, the Mausoleum, the world's first true research institute. This wasn't merely a place to study books, it was a sanctuary where scholars lived, debated, and pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Imagine a campus where history's greatest minds walked the same sunlit corridors, sharing ideas over meals provided by the royal treasury. Euclid, the father of geometry, likely paced these halls, drafting his groundbreaking Elements, a work so foundational that it would shape mathematics for 2,000 years. Archimedes, whose genius gave us levers, pulleys, and the concept of buoyancy, may have tested his theories in the library's courtyards. The Ptolemies didn't just tolerate these thinkers. They actively nurtured them, offering stipends, free housing, and even papyrus on demand, ensuring nothing distracted them from their work. This was ancient academia at its most visionary, a golden age where curiosity was literally fed and funded. One of the most fascinating clashes in the Mausoleum revolved around a question that still captivates linguists today. Was Greek or Egyptian the older language? Scholars passionately defended each side, wielding arguments from mythology, archaeology, and even astronomy. The debate wasn't just academic, it was deeply political, tied to Egypt's identity under Greek rule. Some scholars claimed hieroglyphs held secrets predating the Trojan War, while others pointed to Homer's epics as evidence of Greek primacy. The library became a battleground of ideas where national pride and pure scholarship collided in heated symposiums. What made the Mausoleum revolutionary wasn't just its resources, it was the culture of collaboration it fostered. Unlike isolated thinkers scribbling in solitude, these scholars worked in conversation, refining each other's theories across disciplines. An astronomer might debate a poet, a physician could critique an engineer's designs. This cross-pollination of ideas accelerated discoveries at an unprecedented rate, turning Alexandria into a crucible of innovation that would influence everything from Renaissance art to modern physics. The library didn't just preserve knowledge, it actively manufactured it, one spirited debate at a time. Step into the Great Hall of the Library of Alexandria, and you'd find yourself surrounded by the hum of whispered debates and the faint rustle of papyrus. Sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating row after row of wooden shelves, each meticulously carved with niches to hold scrolls wrapped in protective linen or leather. These weren't just stacked haphazardly, every text had its designated place, thanks to a revolutionary system devised by the poet-scholar Callimachus. His life's work, the Pinax, wasn't simply a list, it was a sprawling masterpiece of organization, spanning 120 scrolls that mapped the entirety of human knowledge like a city planner laying out streets. Callimachus didn't just sort texts by title or author. He categorized them by subject, dividing wisdom into epic poetry, tragedy, philosophy, medicine, and more, then broke those into finer subdivisions. Imagine the ancient equivalent of modern library call numbers. Each entry noted the scroll's origin, its author's biography, even a summary of its contents. For the first time in history, a scholar could locate a specific passage about lunar eclipses or Egyptian embalming techniques without unrolling miles of papyrus in blind search. The Pinax became the backbone of the library, a living index that grew alongside the collection itself. The desks where scholars worked were more than just furniture, they were stations of discovery. Picture a mathematician hunched over a diagram of conic sections, an astronomer comparing Babylonian star charts with Egyptian celestial maps, or a physician cross-referencing herbal remedies from 3 continents. The Great Hall wasn't a silent tomb of texts, it crackled with the energy of minds connecting ideas across disciplines. Scrolls weren't shelved forever, They traveled constantly, passed from hand to hand, annotated in margins with debates that spanned generations. What made this system extraordinary wasn't just its scale, it was the philosophy behind it. Callimachus believed knowledge wasn't truly possessed until it could be retrieved, like finding a single star in a mapped sky. His catalogue didn't just serve the library, it shaped how future generations would organize information, from medieval scriptoria to the digital archives of today. The Pinaques whispered a radical idea, that wisdom, no matter how vast, could be made accessible. And in that bustling hall, amid the scent of ink and papyrus, humanity took its first deliberate step toward mastering the chaos of information. Among the most tantalizing treasures of the Library of Alexandria were the lost works of Aristotle, not just copies, but the philosopher's own personal library, transported to Egypt after his death. These weren't merely scrolls he'd written, they were the very texts he'd studied, annotated, and debated with his students in the Lyceum. Imagine holding a papyrus where Aristotle himself had scribbled marginal notes, refining his theories on everything from the nature of the soul to the movement of celestial spheres. The library didn't just possess fragments of his legacy, it held the raw material of his genius. Historians believe this collection included at least 28 of his lost dialogues works referenced by ancient writers but vanished from history. Unlike his surviving treatises, which often read like dense lecture notes, these dialogues were said to be literary masterpieces, blending philosophy with the drama of conversation. Picture Plato's lively debates, but with Aristotle's razor-sharp logic dissecting ideas in real time. One lost work on philosophy reportedly traced the history of human thought from the earliest myths to his own theories, while on justice explored ethics through gripping courtroom-style scenarios. Even more intriguing were whispers of a scientific text called On Islands, where Aristotle allegedly documented strange creatures and geological wonders from travelers' accounts, an ancient precursor to natural history fieldwork. But the real mystery lies in his vanished research. Surviving texts hint at revolutionary ideas that never made it to the modern era. Cicero mentions Aristotle's Exoterics, a series of works written for public consumption rather than academic circles. These might have contained his most accessible and perhaps controversial thoughts on politics, theology, or even early experiments in anatomy. References in later Arabic manuscripts suggest he'd written extensively on optics, possibly describing lenses centuries before they were invented. And then there's the tantalizing mention by Plutarch of a scroll called On the Soul's Immortality, where Aristotle supposedly challenged Plato's most sacred beliefs. Did he privately doubt the afterlife? Without these texts, we're left piecing together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The loss becomes even more haunting when you consider how Aristotle's missing works might have reshaped history. His surviving Politics outlines theories of governance, but the lost On Kingship was said to analyze real-world rulers, including Alexander the Great, his most famous student. What insights did he withhold from public texts? Similarly, his Problems, a surviving collection of scientific questions, references a companion work called Solutions, now gone. Did it contain breakthroughs in physics or medicine that would have leaped ahead of their time? The library's copies weren't just backups, they were often the only versions. When Alexandria burned, Aristotle didn't just lose words, he lost dimensions of his intellect we can now only glimpse through the fractured mirror of history. Yet the greatest tragedy might be what we don't even know was lost. Ancient catalogues describe scrolls with titles like On the Nile's Floods or the customs of the Hyperboreans, works that could have rewritten our understanding of geography, anthropology, even early climate science. Some scholars speculate he'd compiled eyewitness accounts of distant lands, creating an ancient atlas of human knowledge. Others whisper of a text called the Unwritten Doctrines, where Aristotle supposedly recorded his most radical ideas, deemed too explosive for circulation. We'll never truly know how much brighter the spark of enlightenment might have burned if those shelves had survived. The Library of Alexandria didn't just house Aristotle's books, it held the unwritten chapters of human thought itself. One of the most extraordinary cultural projects ever undertaken in the Library of Alexandria wasn't about collecting existing knowledge, it was about creating it anew. Ptolemy II, the visionary ruler who inherited his father's passion for scholarship, set his sights on a text that had never been translated outside its original language, the Hebrew Bible. The result was the Septuagint, a Greek version so meticulously crafted that its birth became wrapped in legend. The story goes that 72 Jewish scholars, 6 from each of the 12 tribes, were summoned from Jerusalem to Alexandria, housed in separate quarters on the island of Pharaohs, and given identical copies of the Torah to translate independently. Miraculously, when their work was complete, all 72 translations matched word for word. Ancient writers like Philo and Aristotle saw this as divine intervention, proof that the translation carried God's own stamp of approval. Whether myth or fact, this tale reveals how seriously the Ptolemies approached the sacred task, not as mere linguistic conversion, but as a spiritual and intellectual bridge between cultures. But behind the legend lies an even more fascinating reality. The Septuagint wasn't just a religious text, it was a political and cultural masterstroke. By commissioning it, Ptolemy accomplished something unprecedented. He made the Hebrew scriptures accessible to the Greek-speaking world, weaving Jewish thought into the fabric of Hellenistic scholarship. For the first time, philosophers across the Mediterranean could engage with monotheistic theology, Mosaic law, and Hebrew poetry. The library didn't merely preserve this translation, it transformed it into a cornerstone of Western thought, influencing everything from early Christian theology to Renaissance art. The translators faced staggering challenges. Hebrew, with its layered meanings and poetic rhythms, doesn't map easily onto Greek's precise syntax. Take the divine name, Iho, rendered as Kyrios, Lord, or the famous opening of Genesis, where Bereshit became an arch in the beginning. These choices weren't neutral, they shaped how generations would perceive creation, justice, and divinity. Some scholars argue the Septuagint softened anthropomorphic descriptions of God to align with Greek philosophical ideals, subtly merging traditions. What's often overlooked is how this project reflected Alexandria's unique ethos. Unlike conquerors who imposed their culture, the Ptolemies sought synthesis, proof that the library's mission wasn't domination but dialogue. The Septuagint became a living testament to the idea that wisdom transcends language and that the greatest ideas flourish when they're shared. It's no accident that this translation, born in a library, would later be quoted by the authors of the Christian New Testament, ensuring its influence stretched far beyond the flames that eventually consumed its home. Hidden in the shadows of the Library of Alexandria's grand halls was a chamber that would make even modern surgeons pause, the anatomy theater of Herophilos, a physician whose groundbreaking work rewrote medical history. While most scholars pored over scrolls, he worked with scalpels and specimens, pushing ethical boundaries to map the human body with precision never before attempted. The Ptolemies granted him an unprecedented privilege, access to cadavers for dissection, a practice forbidden in Greece but quietly sanctioned in Egypt's pursuit of knowledge. Herophilos didn't just cut, he observed with a rigor that bordered on artistic. Peering into the intricate web of vessels, he made a startling distinction. Veins, thick-walled and pulsing, carried blood from the heart, while arteries, thinner and branching like tree roots, distributed it outward. This wasn't mere observation, it was the seed of a theory that wouldn't fully bloom until William Harvey's time. He even traced the nervous system, identifying sensory and motor nerves, realizing they connected not to the heart, as Aristotle claimed, but to the brain. Imagine the audacity of challenging the greatest philosopher in history with nothing but a scalpel and evidence. His most controversial work centered on the eye. Dissecting optic nerves like threads of glass, he theorized they transmitted light to the brain. debunking the popular notion that vision came from beams emitted by the eyes themselves. He mapped the liver's lobes, described the duodenum, a term he coined, and even identified the prostate, findings so accurate they wouldn't be improved upon for 15 centuries. But his methods weren't for the faint-hearted. Ancient critics whispered that some of his subjects weren't always deceased when he began his studies, a dark rumor that haunts his legacy. What set Herophilos apart wasn't just his daring, it was his methodology. Where others relied on philosophical deduction, he championed empirical observation, insisting knowledge must be seen with the eyes, not imagined with the mind. His treatise on anatomy became the library's most coveted medical scroll, blending detailed illustrations with clinical notes. Tragically, only fragments survive, quoted by later physicians like Galen, teasing glimpses of a mind that saw the body not as a mystery, but as a landscape waiting to be charted. The library didn't just house his work, it gave him the freedom to redefine what medicine could be. In those blood-stained halls, modern science took its first breath. In the teeming halls of the Library of Alexandria, where scholars debated everything from poetry to planetary motion, one man turned his gaze to a question no one had answered with certainty: how large was the earth itself? Eratosthenes, the library's chief librarian, wasn't just an administrator, he was a polymath who saw patterns where others saw chaos. His breakthrough came not from complex instruments, but from a simple observation about shadows. During the summer solstice in the city of Scene, the sun stood directly overhead, casting no shadow at the bottom of a deep well. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, 500 miles to the north, a vertical stick still threw a faint shadow. To most, this was just a quirk of sunlight. To Eratosthenes, it was a revelation. Earth's curvature was the reason. He calculated the angle of Alexandria's shadow at 1/50th of a full circle, 7 degrees and 12 minutes. If 500 miles separated the two cities, and that distance represented 1/50th of Earth's total circumference, then the planet must be 25,000 miles around. The elegance of his math was breathtaking. Without satellites or laser precision, using little more than geometry and a keen eye, he arrived at a figure within 1% of today's accepted measurement. Imagine the audacity, mapping the entire world with nothing but sticks, shadows, and sheer intellect. Yet what's equally astonishing is how this knowledge slipped through history's fingers. Later scholars, like Ptolemy the astronomer, dismissed Eratosthenes' work in favor of smaller, less accurate estimates. Medieval mapmakers shrank the world further, their charts reflecting political and religious dogma rather than empirical truth. Columbus famously relied on these flawed calculations, believing Asia lay just beyond the horizon when he sailed west. Had Eratosthenes' findings been preserved and championed, the age of exploration might have unfolded with far fewer surprises and shipwrecks. The tragedy here isn't just the loss of a number, it's the silencing of a methodology. Eratosthenes embodied the library's spirit, curiosity paired with rigor, observation married to calculation. His work proved that the answers to grand questions often lie in humble details, waiting for someone to connect the dots. While later centuries would forget his precise measurements, the echo of his approach, measuring the world rather than merely speculating about it, would eventually re-emerge, reshaping science itself. In a way, his shadow still stretches across time, a reminder of how much brilliance flickered in those Alexandrian halls before the darkness fell. Deep in the heart of the Library of Alexandria, where scholars debated philosophy and mapped the stars, an inventor named Hero conducted experiments that would one day change the world with steam. While most remember the library for its scrolls and poetry, Hero's workshop buzzed with a different kind of magic. Hissing contraptions, spiraling tubes, and a device that could harness the power of boiling water itself, the Eolipile, history's first known steam engine. Picture a hollow metal sphere mounted between two pipes suspended over a fire. As water inside heated into steam, it rushed through the pipes and blasted out through bent nozzles, sending the sphere spinning at dizzying speeds. This wasn't just a toy, it was proof that heat could be transformed into motion, a principle that would one day power locomotives and factories. Hero called it a wind ball, but its implications were earth-shaking. He'd unlocked the basic mechanics of steam power nearly 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. Yet for all its brilliance, the Aeolipile never left the realm of wonder. Unlike later inventors who paired steam engines with pumps and pistons, Hero saw his creation as a temple marvel, a way to animate statues or pour wine automatically at religious festivals. Some historians argue the ancient world lacked the metallurgy or economic pressure to scale his designs. Without coal mines needing drainage or textiles demanding mechanization, steam remained a curiosity rather than a necessity. Others theorize the intellectual climate played a role where later Europeans sought practical applications. Alexandrian scholars often valued knowledge for its own sake, content to demonstrate principles without industrializing them. The real mystery isn't why Hero's engine didn't catch on sooner, but how its blueprint survived at all. When the library fell, fragments of his work, Pneumatica, were smuggled to Constantinople by Byzantine scholars. These manuscripts, copied and recopied over centuries, eventually reached Renaissance engineers like Leonardo da Vinci, who sketched his own versions of Hero's devices. Arab scholars, too, preserved and expanded on his ideas. 9th century inventors in Baghdad built steam-powered fountains and automatons inspired by his designs. By the time James Watt perfected the steam engine in the 1700s, he stood on the shoulders of a genius whose name had faded into obscurity. Hero's legacy whispers a haunting question: what if Alexandria's collapse hadn't severed the thread of innovation? Could steam-powered ships have sailed Roman waters, or mechanized looms woven Egyptian linen centuries earlier? The Aeolipile reminds us that technological progress isn't inevitable, it's fragile, dependent on institutions like the library to nurture and transmit ideas across generations. Hero didn't just invent a gadget, he lit a fuse that took millennia to reach its powder keg. In those spinning metal spheres, we see not just an engine, but a road not taken, a glimpse of how different history might have been if the flames had spared those scrolls. One of the most electrifying legends to emerge from the Library of Alexandria's orbit isn't about scrolls or scholarship, it's about war. The tale goes that during the siege of Syracuse, the brilliant mathematician Archimedes, a frequent collaborator with the library's scholars, unleashed a terrifying weapon. A battery of polished bronze mirrors arranged to focus sunlight into a searing beam capable of igniting Roman warships at sea. Ancient writers like Lucian and Galen described wooden vessels bursting into flames as if struck by divine lightning, while later Byzantine chroniclers claimed the mirrors could melt shields at 300 paces. But was this an actual feat of engineering or just a myth that grew taller with time? Modern scientists have wrestled with this question for decades, testing whether the so-called Archimedes' death ray could have worked. In 2005, a team from MIT attempted to recreate the effect using 127 square feet of mirrored bronze, the largest plausible array Syracuse's defenders might have mobilized. Their results were startling. Under optimal conditions, clear skies, motionless ships anchored within 200 feet, they generated temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Fahrenheit, enough to char wood and ignite pitch-coated hulls. But the challenges were immense. Maintaining precise alignment on bobbing ships would have required near impossible coordination, and cloud cover or evasive maneuvers could easily thwart the attack. Skeptics argue that ancient accounts might have conflated the mirrors with another of Archimedes' innovations, catapults launching incendiary pots of quicklime or naphtha, substances known to ignite on contact with water. Yet intriguingly, the core physics holds up. The library scholars were deeply familiar with parabolic reflectors. Hero of Alexandria later described their light-focusing properties in his Catoptrics. Archimedes, who'd spent years studying optics in Alexandria, would have grasped the principle perfectly. What makes this legend so compelling isn't just its plausibility, but what it reveals about the library's shadow role in warfare. Far from being an ivory tower, its thinkers routinely advised rulers on military engineering, from siege engines to hydrodynamics. Archimedes' mirrors, whether fact or folklore, symbolize a darker truth. Even history's greatest bastion of knowledge couldn't escape the brutal realities of its age. The same intellect that measured the cosmos was also harnessed to burn fleets, proof that genius, like sunlight, can illuminate or scorch, depending on whose hands aim the mirror. Beyond the public halls where scholars debated geometry and astronomy, whispers swirled about a shadowed wing of the Library of Alexandria, a place where scrolls weren't just rare but actively suppressed. This wasn't your typical archive of poetry or history. It was said to house texts so explosive they threatened the foundations of religion, science, and even the throne itself. Imagine a vault where Egyptian priests had smuggled their most guarded magical formulas, where renegade philosophers speculated about turning lead into gold, and where Gnostic Christians transcribed visions of divine realms beyond the control of Orthodox bishops. These weren't just books, they were intellectual dynamite. The Ptolemies, for all their love of knowledge, understood that some ideas could unravel the social order. Take alchemy, for instance, not the cartoonish quest for gold, but a serious proto-science blending metallurgy with mystical philosophy. Texts like the Emerald Tablet supposedly contained secrets of manipulating matter itself, techniques so potent they could destabilize economies if widely known. Then there were the astrological treatises, not just star charts but manuals claiming celestial forces dictated the rise and fall of kings, an idea that could justify rebellion if fallen into the wrong hands. Even early drafts of Euclid's Elements were rumored to have been locked away until deemed safe, their geometric proofs considered too subversive for public consumption. Most controversial were the Gnostic Gospels, Christian writings that diverged radically from Orthodox teachings. Unlike the New Testament's emphasis on faith and redemption, these texts described secret knowledge, gnosis, as the true path to enlightenment. One rumored scroll, the Apocryphon of John, portrayed the biblical God as a flawed demiurge, while another, the Gospel of Thomas, attributed shocking sayings to Jesus. Split a piece of wood and I am there. For a library that served both pagan and Christian scholars, these were theological landmines. Some historians speculate the infamous burning of the library wasn't just about destroying knowledge, it was a targeted purge of heresies too dangerous to preserve. Yet the most tantalizing rumors concern the Egyptian Book of Thoth, a legendary manual of spells allegedly penned by the god of wisdom himself. Ancient sources claim it granted power over life and death not metaphorically, but through precise invocations and rituals. Fragmentary copies found in later graves suggest some version existed, possibly blending advanced chemistry with psychological manipulation. Was this science disguised as magic or something darker? The library's restricted section didn't just hide knowledge, it guarded the blurred line between enlightenment and oblivion, where a single scroll could rewrite reality as people knew it. What makes these whispers so haunting isn't just the lost texts, but the pattern they reveal. Every age censors the ideas it fears might undo it. The Library of Alexandria, for all its grandeur, was no exception. In those sealed chambers, the past whispers a warning that knowledge is never neutral, and the most dangerous books aren't the ones that burn, but the ones that change minds. The relationship between the Library of Alexandria's two main branches wasn't just a matter of location, it was a deliberate division of knowledge that shaped what survived and what vanished forever. At the royal palace in the Bruchian district stood the Mother Library, the crown jewel of the Ptolemies' intellectual empire. This wasn't some quiet study hall. It was a sprawling complex of lecture theaters, laboratories, and dining halls where scholars lived on stipends, debating under colonnades lined with the rarest manuscripts. Here, Aristotle's personal scrolls rubbed shoulders with Euclid's geometric proofs and Hypatia's star catalogues. The Bruchian collection was the heartbeat of ancient scholarship, a place where kings hosted symposia to hear the latest theories on everything from conic sections to the nature of the soul. But just across the city, nestled within the towering Serapeum temple complex, its so-called daughter library served a radically different purpose. While the Bruchian focused on cutting-edge research, the Serapeum acted as a public archive, a place where merchants, travelers, and local students could access Greek translations of Egyptian medical texts or copies of Homer's epics. Think of it like the difference between a top-tier university's restricted archives and a bustling city library. The Serapeum's collection was smaller. Estimates suggest around 40,000 scrolls compared to the Bruchian's 500,000, but no less significant. Many were duplicates of the main library's holdings, carefully copied by scribes to prevent wear on originals. Others were unique, temple records of ancient Nile floods, Persian astronomical observations, even early drafts of plays later censored for political content. Their fates diverged as dramatically as their functions. When Julius Caesar's troops famously set fire to the harbor in 48 BC during his war with Pompey, flames spread to the Bruchian district. Though ancient accounts debate the extent of the damage, some claim only warehouses burned, others insist the main library was gutted. The mother library never fully recovered its prestige. Yet the Serapeum endured for centuries longer, becoming a flashpoint in the late 4th century when Christian mobs, enraged by pagan symbols, tore down its statues and likely scattered or destroyed its remaining texts. The irony is heartbreaking. The research library perished first while the People's Archive outlived it, only to fall to ideological violence rather than accident. What makes this duality so revealing is how it mirrors modern struggles over knowledge access. The Bruchian was exclusive, its treasures reserved for elite scholars under royal patronage, the ancient equivalent of paywalled academic journals. The Serapeum, by contrast, was democratic, its scrolls available to anyone who could read. When both were lost, humanity didn't just lose books, we lost the dialogue between specialized discovery and public dissemination. The Bruchian's destruction starved researchers of primary sources, while the Serapeum's fall severed the thread connecting laypeople to the cutting edge. Together, their stories warn us, knowledge survives only when it has both sanctuaries and streets. To understand how the Library of Alexandria amassed its legendary collection, we need to follow the supply chain back to its source, the papyrus marshes of the Nile Delta. The Ptolemies didn't just collect scrolls, they controlled the very material they were written on. Egypt held a near monopoly on papyrus production, and the royal family leveraged this to dominate the ancient knowledge economy. Picture vast plantations of tall, reed-like cypress papyrus being harvested by skilled workers who knew exactly when the stems were ripe for processing. The inner pith was sliced into thin strips soaked in Nile water, then woven into sheets and pressed, a technique perfected over centuries but industrialized under Ptolemaic rule. This wasn't just craft, it was big business. By regulating exports and charging premium prices, the Ptolemies ensured that rival libraries like Pergamon had to resort to alternatives like parchment, which was more durable but far harder to produce in bulk. Inside Alexandria's scriptoriums, a revolution in standardization was unfolding. While earlier scrolls varied wildly in size, the library's scribes adopted uniform lengths, typically 20 to 30 feet per scroll, a length that balanced readability with practicality. Imagine unrolling a 30-foot sheet of papyrus and finding column after column of crisp Greek text, each line spaced precisely 2 finger widths apart. These weren't arbitrary choices, they maximized storage efficiency. Standardization allowed librarians to calculate shelf space down to the cubit and predict how many scrolls a given subject category might require. The library even developed a system for stitching shorter documents together with flax thread to fill out standard roles, ensuring no scrap of knowledge went unarchived. But the true artistry lay in the inks. Alexandria's chemists, part alchemists, part industrial scientists, perfected formulas that resisted fading yet didn't corrode the delicate papyrus. Black ink came from soot mixed with gum arabic, while reds and blues used powdered minerals like hematite and lapis lazuli for important headings. Surviving fragments show these inks retaining their vibrancy after 2 millennia, a testament to their sophistication. Some scholars speculate the library even had security inks that changed color if diluted or tampered with, an ancient precursor to anti-forgery measures. The heart of this operation was the scribe schools, where generations of copyists trained in what amounted to an intellectual assembly line. Students memorized letter heights and spacing ratios, learning to reproduce texts with near-identical handwriting. The fastest could allegedly transcribe a standard scroll in under 3 days. Quality control was ruthless. Errors meant starting over, and scribes worked under supervisors who spot-checked lines with weighted strings to ensure straightness. Yet this wasn't mere drudgery. Many scribes became scholars in their own right, adding marginal notes that sometimes sparked new interpretations. Their work transformed the library from a repository into a knowledge factory where ideas weren't just stored. They were refined, debated, and reborn with each fresh copy. What's often overlooked is how these logistical choices shaped the content itself. Standard lengths encouraged concision. Plato's dialogues fit neatly on a 20-foot scroll, while epic poems like the Iliad spanned multiple rolls. Ink chemistry influenced survival rates. Works copied with premium pigments endure today, while cheaper editions crumbled. Even scribble habits left fingerprints. Some texts show systematic spelling changes suggesting dialect preferences in the copying rooms. The library didn't just house knowledge, its very infrastructure quietly edited the canon of antiquity, one meticulously crafted scroll at a time. Ptolemy III played a game of intellectual sleight of hand that would make any modern plagiarist blush. Desperate to add the crown jewels of Greek literature to Alexandria's collection, he hatched a scheme as audacious as it was brazen. Athens guarded its official state copies of tragedies by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides like national treasures. These weren't just scripts, but authoritative versions approved by the playwrights themselves, preserved in the city's archives under strict lock and key. Ptolemy approached the Athenian council with an offer they couldn't refuse. Lend us your precious scrolls, and we'll return them alongside a gift of 15 silver talents, a king's ransom in any era. The Athenians, dazzled by the sum and trusting in royal promises, handed over their cultural patrimony. But when the ships returned from Alexandria, the betrayal became clear. The scrolls sent back weren't the originals, but lavish copies beautifully scribed on fresh papyrus, adorned with gold leaf, yet undeniably duplicates. Ptolemy had kept the authentic versions for his library, relegating Athens to holding glorified facsimiles. It was a heist disguised as diplomacy, swapping the soul of Greek drama for gilded replicas. Contemporary writers like Galen fumed at the deception, accusing the Ptolemies of hollowing out other cities' literary heritage under false pretenses. This wasn't an isolated incident. Rhodes found itself similarly outmaneuvered when Ptolemy's agents borrowed their master copies of maritime law treatises, only to return suspiciously identical-looking scrolls missing key annotations. The island's ship captains soon discovered discrepancies in navigation rules that led to costly legal disputes, proof the swapped texts weren't perfect matches. Meanwhile, Syracuse accused Alexandria of commissioning actors to memorize entire plays during performances, then reconstructing them from memory for the library's shelves, bypassing ownership entirely. What made these acts so provocative wasn't just the theft, but the underlying power play. By controlling the most authoritative versions of foundational texts, the Ptolemies positioned Alexandria as the ultimate arbiter of truth. If two cities disagreed on a line from Homer, the library's copy became the deciding vote. Other Mediterranean powers quickly caught on. Pergamon's rulers began stationing guards near their archives, while Ephesus started sealing important scrolls with wax imprints to detect tampering. The ancient world's first copyright wars had begun, not with lawsuits but with whispers of betrayal and the rustle of purloined papyrus. Yet the bitterest irony lay in the fate of those stolen originals. When flames eventually consumed the library, Athens' once prized masterworks burned alongside Alexandria's copies, erasing not just the texts, but the very idea of an authentic version. The Ptolemies' hunger for exclusivity had unwittingly ensured that no perfect copy survived anywhere. In the end, their literary piracy didn't just anger rivals, it helped sever humanity's direct line to some of antiquity's brightest voices. Among the countless treasures housed in the Library of Alexandria, one collection sparked a revolution that still shapes lives today. The Babylonian astronomical scrolls that transformed stargazing into horoscopic astrology. These weren't mere star charts, they were meticulous records of celestial movements painstakingly tracked by Mesopotamian priests over centuries, noting how planetary alignments correlated with earthly events. When these clay tablets reached Alexandria, scholars didn't just translate them, they synthesized an entirely new system of divination, blending Babylonian math with Egyptian mythology and Greek philosophy. The result, the zodiac as we know it, but with a twist that modern astrologers rarely mention. The library's scholars discovered something startling in the original Babylonian records. The sun passed through not 12 but 13 constellations along its yearly path. Ophiuchus, the serpent-bearer, sat squarely between Scorpio and Sagittarius, its stars forming a distinct pattern ancient sky watchers recognized as clearly as Leo or Taurus. So why did it vanish from mainstream astrology? The answer lies in Alexandria's obsession with symmetry. Babylonian math operated on base 60 systems, making 12 zodiac signs far easier to divide into 30-degree segments for horoscope calculations. Ophiuchus, though astronomically valid, became the odd one out sacrificed for mathematical elegance. Imagine an alternate universe where your birthday fell under its influence, linking you to themes of healing and hidden knowledge rather than your current sign's traits. Diving deeper, the scrolls reveal even more radical departures from modern astrology. Babylonian astrologers didn't focus on sun signs, they tracked Jupiter and Venus as celestial kings and queens whose movements predicted wars and harvests. The library's scholars adapted this into a personal tool, crafting birth charts that weighed the moon's position more heavily than the sun's. Their calculations were astonishingly precise. One recovered papyrus shows a horoscope from 37 BC pinpointing planetary angles to within fractions of a degree. This wasn't vague fortune-telling, it was an early form of data science seeking patterns in cosmic noise. Yet the most controversial discovery came when comparing these charts to contemporary astrology. Due to a phenomenon called axial precession, Earth's wobble over millennia has shifted the stars' positions relative to the zodiac dates. The sun now aligns with constellations nearly a month off from when the system was codified. That means if you think you're a Pisces, the Babylonians and the library's scholars would likely have called you an Aquarius. Modern astrologers argue this doesn't matter, as they use tropical zodiacs tied to seasons rather than constellations. But the library's scrolls force us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The stars overhead today tell a very different story than the one etched into those ancient papyri. What makes this more than a historical curiosity is how it reflects Alexandria's intellectual audacity. These scholars didn't just preserve knowledge, they remixed it, sometimes bending reality to fit human preferences. The zodiac we inherited isn't a perfect map of the heavens, but a palimpsest of compromises where Babylonian observations met Greek aesthetics and Egyptian mysticism. In those scrolls, we glimpse something profound. Even our most enduring systems of meaning are shaped by the messy, creative collisions of cultures. and the occasional disappearance of a 13th constellation. When Julius Caesar's troops accidentally set fire to Alexandria's harbor during his conflict with Pompey, flames didn't just consume ships, they licked at the edges of history itself. But here's where the story twists. Contrary to popular belief, the flames never reached the great library's main halls. The real tragedy unfolded in the warehouses nearby, where tens of thousands of scrolls awaiting cataloging went up in smoke. This wasn't the death knell for Alexandria's collection, though. It was the prelude to one of history's greatest intellectual rescue missions. Enter Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, who turned disaster into opportunity with a single bold stroke. Caesar, racked with guilt over the blaze, sought to make amends by gifting Cleopatra an astonishing treasure, 200,000 scrolls from the rival library of Pergamum, a trove so vast it required an entire fleet to transport. This wasn't just a romantic gesture, it was geopolitical theater. Pergamum, nestled in modern-day Turkey, had been Alexandria's fiercest competitor in the ancient knowledge wars. Its rulers had spent generations amassing texts on everything from Anatolian folk medicine to Zoroastrian prophecies, often outbidding Ptolemaic agents for rare manuscripts. By stripping Pergamum of its collection, Caesar didn't just replenish Alexandria's losses, he decapitated its rival, ensuring Egypt's dominance in the Mediterranean's intellectual arena. The logistics of this transfer boggle the mind. Imagine ships creaking under the weight of cedarwood crates, each packed with scrolls wrapped in linen against the Mediterranean salt. Scribes worked around the clock to catalog the incoming texts, sorting them into categories that blended Pergamum's Anatolian focus with Alexandria's Greek-Egyptian traditions. Some scrolls still bore the faint scent of Pergamum's famous parchment, a leather-based writing material developed when the Ptolemies embargoed papyrus exports to stunt their competitors' growth. Now, that very contingency plan lay unspooled in Cleopatra's scriptoriums, being copied onto Egyptian papyrus as if to erase its origins. What makes this moment pivotal isn't just the scale of the acquisition, but how it transformed Alexandria's intellectual landscape. Pergamum's collection brought perspectives the Ptolemies had previously ignored: detailed accounts of Persian astronomy, Hittite legal codes, even early studies of volcanic activity near Mount Vesuvius. These weren't dry records, they were windows into how other civilizations tackled the same fundamental questions Alexandria's scholars pondered. A physician comparing Greek and Lydian treatments for fever might stumble upon a revolutionary remedy. An astronomer cross-referencing Babylonian and Phrygian star charts could detect patterns invisible in either tradition alone. Cleopatra didn't just rebuild a library, she remixed the ancient world's knowledge in ways that would echo for centuries, yet the bitter irony lingers. While this infusion saved Alexandria's status as the Mediterranean's premier knowledge hub, it also concentrated humanity's written heritage in one vulnerable location. The Pergamum scrolls, having survived political upheavals and rivalries, now shared the same doomed fate as the rest of Alexandria's collection, eventually lost to the fires of war and time. Cleopatra's expansion wasn't just a chapter in the library's story. It was a cautionary tale about the fragility of centralized knowledge and how even the greatest attempts to preserve it can become its unwitting undoing. The blaze that supposedly destroyed the Library of Alexandria during Julius Caesar's siege in 48 BC has become one of history's most persistent myths, but peel back the layers and the truth reveals something far more nuanced. Picture the chaos of that summer night. Caesar's fleet trapped in the harbor, his soldiers desperately hurling firebrands toward Pompey's blockade, only for the flames to spiral out of control. Ancient chroniclers like Plutarch and Cassius Dio describe a catastrophic inferno spreading to the dockside warehouses, where mountains of books awaited shipment. Yet none of these first-hand accounts mention the actual library catching fire. So how did this localized disaster transform into the legend of a total cultural annihilation? The key lies in understanding what those warehouses contained. Alexandria operated as a bustling export hub for papyrus scrolls, both library duplicates meant for foreign scholars and commercial copies of popular texts. When flames consumed these storage buildings, they didn't just burn books, they incinerated the Mediterranean's largest distribution center for knowledge. Imagine the shockwaves. Merchants arriving to collect orders found ashes instead of Aristotle, smoke where Sophocles should have been. Word spread that Alexandria's books had burned, and over centuries, the distinction between warehouse and library blurred in the collective memory. Archaeological evidence paints a clearer picture. Excavations near the ancient harbor reveal thick layers of charred organic material consistent with vast papyrus stockpiles, but no signs of fire damage around the Bruchaean district where the main library stood. Even more telling, contemporary scholars like Strabo continued referencing the library's collections decades after Caesar's time. If the heart of the institution had burned, why would its most famous geographer still rely on its resources 25 years later? The myth's endurance stems from a perfect storm of dramatic storytelling and political agendas. Early Christian writers like Orosius amplified the tale to critique pagan knowledge's fragility, while Renaissance humanists used it as a cautionary fable about cultural vulnerability. But perhaps the most ironic twist, the fire myth itself may have inadvertently protected the library's legacy. By cementing its destruction in popular imagination, historians were forced to look closer, uncovering not a single catastrophic end, but a slow unraveling through neglect, politics, and multiple smaller losses across centuries. What remains haunting isn't the size of the fire, but the realization of how easily the threads of history fray. One night's accident didn't erase the library, but it did foreshadow how fragile the vessels of knowledge truly are when caught between war's chaos and memory's imperfections. Hypatia's story isn't just a tragedy, it's the moment the light of Alexandria's intellectual golden age flickered out. By the early 5th century, the library's glory had faded, its halls no longer buzzing with the debates of Euclid and Eratosthenes. Yet one figure still embodied its spirit, Hypatia, a mathematician and philosopher whose brilliance shone like a lone star in the gathering dark. Cloaked in the traditional tribun, the philosopher's mantle, she walked the same streets where scholars once dissected the cosmos, now lined with churches whose leaders viewed her wisdom as a threat. Her lectures on Plato and Aristotle drew crowds. Her astronomical charts predicted celestial events with eerie precision, and her refinements to Ptolemy's Almagest made it the definitive work on planetary motion for over a millennium. But in a city increasingly torn between faith and reason, her very existence became a provocation. The violence that claimed her life began as a rumor, a whisper that Hypatia's influence over Alexandria's governor, Orstes, was thwarting the ambitions of Cyril, the newly risen Christian bishop. Some claimed she practiced witchcraft, pointing to her mechanical astrolabes as proof of dark arts. Others resented her refusal to convert, seeing her pagan resilience as an affront to the city's changing identity. On a March morning in 415, a mob of Cyril's supporters ambushed her chariot, dragging her into a church once dedicated to the god Serapis. What followed wasn't just murder, it was symbolic annihilation. They stripped her naked, scraped her flesh with oyster shells, a brutal parody of ancient purification rites, and burned what remained of her body. The message was clear: the age of unfettered inquiry was over. Yet Hypatia's death wasn't merely the end of a life, it was the unmaking of an ideal. She had personified the library's ethos, the belief that knowledge transcended gender, faith, and politics. Her students included Christians, Jews, and pagans alike, united by curiosity rather than creed. Her astronomical tables, used by sailors and farmers, proved truth could serve all. In killing her, the mob didn't just silence a scholar, they severed Alexandria's last living link to its founding vision. Within decades, the library's remnants were scattered, its shelves repurposed for religious texts. The cruelest irony, Hypatia's greatest work may have been lost in the chaos. Later scholars like Synesius praised her inventions, including a hydrometer for measuring liquid density and an improved astrolabe for navigation. Some suspect she'd begun revising Archimedes' calculations on sphere geometry, a breakthrough that might have accelerated scientific progress by centuries. Instead, her legacy survives largely through the horrified accounts of her murder, a cautionary tale about what happens when ideology drowns out reason. The library's physical destruction was gradual, but Hypatia's death marked the moment its soul was extinguished. In that blood-stained church, the ancient world's faith in knowledge itself took its last shuddering breath. By the year 391, the Serapeum stood as the last bastion of Alexandria's pagan intellectuals, a temple library hybrid where the scent of incense still mingled with papyrus, and where defiant scholars whispered Plato's dialogues beneath the gaze of a toppled statue of Serapis. The Christian emperor Theodosius I had just issued his final blow against pagan institutions, ordering the destruction of all non-Christian temples across the empire. For the scholars who'd once wandered these halls debating astronomy and metaphysics, the Serapeum wasn't just a library, it was a final refuge, as Bishop Theophilus of Alexandria rallied a mob to purge the city of its idolatry. These philosophers barricaded themselves among the scrolls, knowing the battle for the soul of knowledge had reached its bloody crescendo. Eyewitness accounts from the time paint a scene of surreal horror. The mob, armed with hammers and torches, smashed through the Serapeum's bronze doors to find elderly grammarians clutching scrolls like shields, their voices rising in a final recitation of Homer's verses as if words alone could turn back the tide. Statues of gods and muses were toppled, their marble faces shattered against the mosaic floors where students once sat cross-legged in study. The destruction wasn't haphazard, it was methodical. Scrolls depicting astrology or Neoplatonist philosophy were fed to bonfires, while Christian monks hastily salvaged mathematical and medical texts deemed useful for the new order. The air grew thick with the acrid tang of burning papyrus and the metallic scent of gilded statues melting down. What made this moment tragic wasn't just the violence, it was the erasure of a unique synthesis. The Serapeum had been a place where Egyptian priests once debated Greek astronomers over Babylonian star charts, where Gnostic Christians secretly copied Hermetic texts alongside Orthodox scribes. Now, as the smoke curled upward, the last remnants of that pluralism crumbled. The victorious Christians didn't merely destroy the temple, they reconsecrated it as a church, whitewashing frescoes of Thoth, the god of wisdom, and chiseling crosses into the very shelves that had held Aristotle's lost dialogues. Yet whispers persist that not all was lost. Some say a faction of scholars escaped through underground tunnels, smuggling scrolls to ships bound for Beirut or Constantinople. Others claim certain texts were hidden beneath the temple's foundations, sealed behind false walls in anticipation of this very day. Whether myth or fact, these stories speak to a deeper truth, that ideas once kindled resist total annihilation. The Serapeum's physical form may have fallen, but the spirit of inquiry that once animated its halls would resurface centuries later, disguised as alchemy in medieval Baghdad or coded into Renaissance geometry. The mob thought they were ending heresy. What they didn't realize was how stubbornly knowledge clings to life, finding new soil in the cracks of history. The story that Caliph Omar I ordered the final destruction of the Library of Alexandria in 642 has been repeated for centuries, but peel back the layers and you'll find a tale woven more from political grudges than historical fact. The account appears in a 13th century Christian chronicle by Gregory Bar Hebraeus, written 600 years after the supposed event. According to his version, when Arab general Amr ibn al-As conquered Alexandria, he wrote to the caliph asking what to do with the library's surviving books. Omar allegedly replied, "If those writings agree with the Quran, we have no need of them, and if they oppose it, destroy them." The story claims scrolls were used as fuel for the city's bathhouses, burning for months. It's a dramatic narrative, but one that crumbles under scrutiny. Archaeology tells a different story. By the time Arab forces arrived, the library's main complex in the Bruchian district had lain in ruins for centuries, likely destroyed during Aurelian's siege in the 200s or the riots under Emperor Diocletian. The Serapeum, its last outpost, had been sacked by Christian mobs in 391. What remained were scattered private collections and church-owned manuscripts, valuable, but a shadow of the library's former glory. Contemporary Arab historians like al-Masudi and Ibn al-Kifti make no mention of any mass book burning, focusing instead on Alexandria's strategic harbor and fortifications. Even more telling, Egyptian papyrus records from the period show thriving book markets and scholarly activity in nearby Fustat, where Muslim rulers actively preserved Greek medical and scientific texts. The real tragedy lies in how this myth obscures a more nuanced truth. Alexandria's decline wasn't the work of a single conqueror, but a slow unraveling across centuries through Roman neglect, Christian zealotry, and the simple entropy of time. Scrolls left untended in humid coastal air crumbled to dust. Parchment gnawed by insects became illegible. As the city's wealth faded, so did its ability to maintain such an ambitious project. The caliph's alleged order makes for a gripping morality tale about faith versus reason, but the historical record whispers a subtler warning. Knowledge vanishes not just by fire and sword, but through indifference and decay. What makes this distortion particularly ironic is how it clashes with the broader Islamic Golden Age's relationship with ancient texts. Far from rejecting Greek wisdom, scholars in Baghdad and Cordoba meticulously translated Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Ptolemy, works they often sourced from Alexandria's surviving fragments. The famed House of Wisdom in Baghdad, founded just decades after the conquest, operated much like the original Mausian, blending diverse intellectual traditions. In clinging to the Omar myth, we risk overlooking a profound lesson. Civilizations rise and fall, but ideas have a way of slipping through the cracks, finding new patrons in unexpected places. The library's true end wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet fading, like ink disappearing from parchment left too long in the sun. As the flames of Alexandria's final days flickered, a quiet exodus of knowledge began, scrolls slipping away in the hands of fleeing scholars, tucked into merchants' caravans or secreted onto ships bound for safer shores. One of the greatest sanctuaries emerged in the Byzantine Empire, where remote mountain monasteries became unexpected arks for ancient wisdom. Picture torch-lit scriptoria in places like Mount Athos, where monks hunched over parchment, meticulously copying Euclid's geometry and Hippocratic medical treatises alongside their devotional texts. These weren't mere duplicates, they were acts of rebellion, preserving pagan science under the veil of Christian piety. The Vatican Library later harbored some of these smuggled treasures, including manuscripts bearing water stains from their perilous sea journeys, physical scars of their escape from annihilation. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, a new beacon of learning rose in Baghdad's House of Wisdom. When the Abbasid caliphs launched their monumental translation movement in the 8th century, they scoured the remnants of Alexandria's diaspora, offering gold for Greek texts. Hunayn ibn Ishaq, a Nestorian Christian physician, became the era's most prolific knowledge smuggler, tracking down rare medical scrolls in Byzantine monasteries and translating them into Arabic. Galen's anatomical studies, once debated in Alexandria's halls, found fresh life in Baghdad's hospitals, now annotated with innovations by Islamic scholars like al-Razi. The twist: many of these Arabic translations would later filter back into Europe during the Crusades, completing a bizarre circular journey from Greek to Syriac to Arabic to Latin, a millennium-long game of intellectual telephone. But the most tantalizing detour led to Moorish Spain. In 10th century Cordoba, the Umayyad caliphs amassed a library rumored to hold over 400,000 volumes, many bearing the cryptic marginalia of Alexandrian scribes. Jewish scholars like Hasdai ibn Shaprut orchestrated a trilingual knowledge exchange, translating Arabic texts into Hebrew and Latin, effectively rebuilding Alexandria's pluralistic spirit on Iberian soil. One surviving manuscript, now in Madrid's Escorial Library, shows Ptolemy's star charts with Hebrew glosses beside Arabic notes, layers of dialogue across faiths and centuries. Yet the most persistent legend whispers of scrolls that never left Alexandria at all. Medieval Arab historians like al-Makrizi reported vast underground catacombs beneath the city, where priests allegedly walled off precious texts as the temples fell. Modern ground-penetrating radar has revealed anomalous chambers near the Serapeum's ruins, some lined with waterproof bitumen, a tantalizing hint at deliberate preservation. Divers exploring the sunken royal quarters have even recovered oddly intact parchment fragments in submerged niches, their ink miraculously resistant to seawater. Whether these are random survivors or clues to a deliberate cache remains one of history's most electrifying unsolved puzzles. The irony is profound. Alexandria's greatest legacy may not be what it lost, but how its fragments seeded the world. Like dandelion spores, its ideas scattered on winds of conquest and trade, taking root in places the Ptolemies never imagined. Those surviving scraps, now scattered from Sinai to Oxford, form a ghostly mirror of the original library, not centralized in one grand hall, but woven into the very fabric of global thought, waiting to be pieced back together by curious minds. Beneath the bustling streets of modern Alexandria lies one of archaeology's most tantalizing puzzles, the precise location of the legendary library's ruins. Unlike ancient sites preserved in deserts or untouched by urban sprawl, the heart of Ptolemaic Alexandria now sleeps under centuries of layered history, where Roman aqueducts, Byzantine churches, and Ottoman-era buildings have risen and fallen like waves over the original city grid. Excavations here aren't just about digging through earth, they're a high-stakes game of historical hide and seek, where every shovel stroke risks disturbing fragile Ottoman mosaics or medieval cisterns. Modern sewers and subway tunnels snake through what might have once been the library's reading rooms, making traditional excavation nearly impossible without collapsing the city above. Recent breakthroughs haven't come from land but from the sea. French marine archaeologist Frank Godio's team, scanning the harbor floor with magnetometers, uncovered colossal stone blocks and statues just offshore, likely toppled into the water by ancient earthquakes. Among these ruins lies a structure that defies easy explanation. A rectangular foundation lined with niches too small for statues, their dimensions eerily matching descriptions of scroll storage units from ancient texts. Could this be a submerged annex where overflow collections were kept? The discovery of nearby Ptolemaic-era shipwrecks loaded with empty wooden crates, perhaps used to transport scrolls, fuels speculation that part of the library's holdings were being evacuated when disaster struck. Yet the challenges multiply beneath the waves. Harbor sediments churned by currents and pollution obscure details that would be clear on land. Saltwater has devoured organic materials like papyrus and leather bindings, leaving only stone and ceramic fragments as silent witnesses. Even when artifacts survive, their context is scrambled by centuries of seismic shifts. A single column might belong to a temple, a warehouse, or the library itself. The murky visibility forces archaeologists to rely on sonar and 3D mapping, piecing together a ghostly digital reconstruction of what the harbor floor once held. The most promising clue emerged in 2021 when radar scans near the modern Caesar Resort Hotel revealed a vast underground network matching descriptions of the Bruccean district storerooms. Initial probes uncovered charred papyrus fragments in a layer of ash consistent with Caesar's fire, but the site lies beneath a vital traffic artery, halting further investigation. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities faces an agonizing choice: disrupt daily life for thousands in pursuit of a cultural holy grail, or leave the mystery entombed beneath asphalt and exhaust. What makes these fragments so maddening is their incompleteness. Like finding single puzzle pieces from different boxes, each discovery hints at the library's grandeur without revealing the full picture. The underwater annex, if confirmed, suggests the Ptolemies distributed their collections across multiple buildings, a precaution against exactly the kind of catastrophe that befell them. Meanwhile, ground-penetrating radar hints at untouched chambers beneath the Shalalat Gardens, their vaulted ceilings still intact. Until technology or political will allows deeper exploration, the library's core remains just out of reach, whispering through the cracks of Alexandria's layered streets, daring us to dig deeper. The dream of resurrecting the Library of Alexandria isn't confined to history books. It's unfolding right now in a sleek, crescent-shaped building just a mile from where the original once stood. The modern Bibliotheca Alexandrina, inaugurated in 2002, isn't just a tribute to its ancient namesake. It's spearheading an audacious mission to digitally reassemble the scattered fragments of humanity's oldest knowledge. Imagine a global scavenger hunt where scholars comb through dusty monastery vaults, museum basements, and private collections, scanning every surviving scrap of text that might have once graced Alexandria's shelves. But here's where technology bends the arc of history. Artificial intelligence now stitches these fragments together like an intellectual jigsaw puzzle, recognizing patterns invisible to the human eye. A torn piece of parchment in Cairo might digitally reunite with its long-lost counterpart in Oxford, thanks to algorithms trained on ancient handwriting styles and papyrus fiber analysis. One groundbreaking project, the Synchrotron Scrolls Initiative, uses particle accelerators to virtually unroll carbonized manuscripts too fragile to touch. These texts, baked into lumps of charcoal by volcanic eruptions or library fires, are bombarded with high-energy X-rays that map their internal structure without physical contact. AI then reconstructs the ink traces letter by letter, sometimes revealing entire paragraphs thought lost forever. In 2021, this technique resurrected a previously unknown treatise by the philosopher Philodmus from a scorched scroll found in Herculaneum, proof that even the most hopeless-looking artifacts might still whisper their secrets. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, teams are employing hyperspectral imaging to recover faded ink from palimpsests' medieval manuscripts where scribes scraped away ancient texts to reuse the parchment. What appears as a blank page to the naked eye might conceal Eratosthenes' lost calculations or Sappho's missing poems, now being teased back into visibility by algorithms detecting trace amounts of iron gall ink beneath later writings. The most ambitious endeavor, the Global Alexandria database, aims to create a living digital atlas of ancient knowledge. Every surviving fragment, whether it's a quote from Aristotle preserved in an Arabic commentary or a single line from a play cited by a Byzantine scholar, is being tagged, cross-referenced, and virtually shelved alongside its conceptual siblings. AI doesn't just catalog, it hypothesizes. By analyzing word frequencies, stylistic quirks, and even the spacing between letters, machine learning models can suggest probable authorship for anonymous texts or reconstruct missing sections of damaged works with eerie accuracy. A papyrus shred bearing the phrase, "the motion of spheres," might prompt the system to digitally shelve it near Ptolemy's planetary theories, while a scrap of dialogue about naval battles could trigger links to lost histories of the Phoenician Wars. What makes this more than a technical marvel is how it mirrors the original library's ethos. Just as Ptolemaic scholars synthesized Greek, Egyptian, and Babylonian thought, modern AI identifies connections across languages and eras, spotting, for example, how a 9th century Persian medical text might preserve a distorted version of Herophilos's anatomical research. The digital library isn't just reassembling the past, it's recreating the fertile collisions of ideas that made Alexandria extraordinary. And perhaps most poetically, this virtual resurrection ensures that no single fire or conquest can ever fully erase human knowledge again. The scrolls may have burned, but their echoes, scattered across millennia and continents, are finally being heard as one chorus. Among the countless tragedies of the Library of Alexandria's destruction, few sting quite like the vanished works of Sophocles' 123 plays reduced to a mere 7 survivors. Imagine entire shelves once groaning under the weight of his papyrus scrolls, each containing stories that shaped Greek theater, only to be reduced to cryptic fragments and second-hand mentions. We know the titles of some of these lost masterpieces from ancient commentaries and pottery, inscriptions: The Lovers of Achilles, The Gathering of the Achaeans, Tarius, each name a tantalizing window into what might have been. One surviving account describes the Lovers of Achilles as a radical retelling of the Iliad's hero, portraying him not just as a warrior, but as a man torn between his bond with Patroclus and his duty to the Greek army. Later Roman writers gasped at its daring homoerotic subtext, calling it too bold even for Athens. Then there's Tarius, a play so gruesome its plot still shocks through the ages. Fragments suggest it told the story of a king who rapes his sister-in-law Philomela, then cuts out her tongue to silence her, only for her to weave the truth into a tapestry. Ancient critics praised its innovative use of a chorus of nightingales, their songs mirroring Philomela's mutilated cries. A pottery shard from 5th century BC Athens shows a scene possibly from this very play, a woman holding a bloodied loom, her mouth agape in a silent scream. The Library of Alexandria likely held the definitive version, complete with stage directions and musical notations now lost to time. Even the surviving plays hint at how much we've lost. Oedipus Rex, Antigone, and Electra share a structural fingerprint. Each builds toward a catastrophic revelation triggered by meticulous detective work. Scholars suspect this was Sophocles' signature style, perfected across dozens of now-vanished works. A scrap of parchment found in Oxyrhynchus quotes a Greek critic marveling at the Scythians, another lost play, where the climax hinged on a character deciphering tattooed messages on a slave's back. This wasn't just entertainment, it was a masterclass in suspense, copied and studied by playwrights from Rome to Byzantium. The real tragedy isn't just the loss of stories, but the erosion of an entire artistic evolution. Those 7 surviving plays, they're mostly from Sophocles' later years. The 100+ missing works represented his experimental phase, where he allegedly pioneered the third actor, breaking from the traditional 2-actor rule, introduced painted scenery, and even dabbled in comedic relief. A 1st century CE essayist describes watching the foot race, a rollicking satire about athletes caught cheating at the Olympics, complete with slapstick and a chorus dressed as referees. Without the library's copies, we'll never know how the poet who gave us Antigone's solemn grief also made audiences howl with laughter. Perhaps most haunting are the Whispers of the Muses, a play so meta-theatrical it allegedly broke the fourth wall centuries before the term existed. According to a Byzantine scholar who'd seen a tattered copy before it vanished, the chorus directly addressed the audience, questioning whether mortals could ever truly understand the gods' will, a theme that resonated with Alexandria's philosophers. One can almost picture it staged in the library's courtyard, actors and scholars debating its meaning long after the curtains fell. The silence where those voices once echoed is a reminder. When the library burned, we didn't just lose scrolls, we lost the heartbeat of an art form. Among the more tantalizing legends surrounding the Library of Alexandria are whispers that its shelves held far more than the works of Aristotle or scrolls of Greek poetry, that hidden in its vaults lay evidence of lost civilizations, extraterrestrial contact, or blueprints for technology millennia ahead of its time. These theories, though dismissed by mainstream scholars, persist with surprising vitality, fueled by fragments of ancient texts and the enduring human fascination with the idea that our ancestors knew more than history records. One persistent claim suggests the library housed surviving knowledge from Atlantis, passed down through Egyptian priests who encoded it in cryptic hieroglyphs. Proponents point to Plato's dialogues, where the Athenian statesman Solon allegedly learned of Atlantis from Egyptian temple archives, the same archives that may have later furnished Alexandria's collection. Could scrolls describing advanced Atlantean engineering or energy systems have been among them? The irony is rich. A library dedicated to preserving knowledge might have held the very secrets that could rewrite humanity's origins, only to vanish before they could be deciphered. Even more controversial are claims that Alexandria's scholars studied evidence of extraterrestrial contact. Ancient astronaut theorists highlight oddities like the Dendera light relief, an Egyptian carving some interpret as a depiction of an electric bulb, or references in Hermetic texts to celestial chariots. They argue that such artifacts, if housed in the library, would explain why certain ancient cultures shared inexplicably advanced astronomical knowledge. The star catalogue of Hypatia, for instance, mapped celestial coordinates with precision that seems unlikely for the 2nd century BCE. Could he have been working from older, now lost sources describing technologies or observations beyond his era's capabilities? Skeptics counter that these theories cherry-pick anomalies while ignoring the painstaking, earthbound methods ancient scholars actually used. Yet the allure remains, the idea that the library was a clearinghouse for forbidden knowledge, a place where the boundaries between myth and science blurred. Then there's the most provocative theory of all, that the library held blueprints for advanced machines, from Hero's steam engine to hypothetical devices like the legendary Archimedes' death ray. Some fringe historians speculate that Alexandria's scholars didn't just document existing technology, but reverse-engineered even more sophisticated artifacts from ancient cultures. A passing reference in a Byzantine chronicle mentions a mirror that showed the moon's scars, interpreted by some as a primitive telescope. Another fragmentary text describes a mechanical bird that sang without breath, sparking speculation about automata powered by compressed air or hidden mechanisms. Could these have been remnants of a deeper technological tradition, preserved in the library until its destruction? What makes these theories so enduring isn't just their romantic appeal, it's the very nature of the library's destruction. When knowledge vanishes without a trace, imagination rushes in to fill the void. The absence of evidence becomes, paradoxically, the evidence for absence. And perhaps there's a deeper truth buried in these fringe claims, that the Library of Alexandria, by its very existence, represented the limitless potential of human curiosity. Whether it held Atlantean secrets or not, its real power was in the questions it inspired, questions we're still trying to answer today. The whispers of lost technology and alien contact endure because they mirror our own hunger for discovery, a hunger that Alexandria once fed and, in its absence, left ravenous. High in the library of Alexandria's astronomy wing, amid the scent of cedar oil used to preserve delicate star charts, one of humanity's greatest celestial revelations quietly took shape. The discovery didn't come from a single night of observation, but from generations of meticulous record-keeping, centuries of Babylonian clay tablets, Egyptian solar alignments, and Greek celestial maps, all gathered under one roof. It was here that Hypatia, often called the greatest astronomer of antiquity, noticed something peculiar when comparing old observations with his own. The stars weren't quite where they should be. Over decades, the position of the spring equinox had drifted ever so slightly against the fixed backdrop of constellations. This wasn't an error. It was evidence Earth's axis itself wobbled like a spinning top, completing a full cycle every 26,000 years. Today we call this phenomenon axial precession, but in Hypatia's time, it shattered the prevailing belief in an utterly static cosmos. The library's archives gave him an unparalleled advantage. Imagine unrolling centuries-old Babylonian eclipse records alongside Egyptian temple engravings marking solstice sunrises, then cross-referencing them with Greek navigational charts. These weren't scattered fragments, they were a continuous timeline of celestial motion, painstakingly standardized by Alexandria's scholars. One particularly crucial find was Kidinu's tablets from Babylon, which dated back to the 4th century BC. Their precise notation of lunar positions allowed Hypatia to calculate that the equinoxes were shifting at a rate of about 1 degree every 72 years. Without the library's curated collection, this subtle drift might have taken centuries longer to detect. Ptolemy, writing 3 centuries later in his monumental Almagest, leaned heavily on Hypatia's work and, by extension, the library's resources. But there's a twist. While Ptolemy credited Hypatia for discovering precession, he adjusted the rate slightly, likely based on newer observations preserved in Alexandria's updated catalogues. The Almagest became the definitive astronomical text for over a millennium, its geocentric model persisting until Copernicus. Yet buried in its calculations was a ghostly fingerprint of the library's legacy. Those original Babylonian and Greek records that first revealed the heavens weren't fixed. What's often overlooked is how radically this discovery influenced navigation and timekeeping. Precession meant the zodiac constellations gradually shifted over centuries, forcing calendar reforms. Sailors relying on star positions for guidance had to account for this drift, and temple alignments designed to catch the solstice sunrise eventually fell out of sync. The library didn't just enable this revelation, it disseminated the corrections, with scholars sending revised tables to ports and temples across the Mediterranean. The deeper irony, Hypatia's own writings on precession were lost, surviving only through Ptolemy's references. Like so much of Alexandria's knowledge, it became a whisper within a whisper, an idea preserved indirectly even as its original sources turned to ash. Yet that whisper reverberated across time, proving that even fragmented, the library's insights could tilt humanity's understanding of the universe. If you think bestseller lists are a modern invention, the Library of Alexandria had its own version, scrolls so popular they spawned countless copies that still turn up in ruins from Spain to Syria. While philosophers like Plato and Aristotle dominated the intellectual canon, dig into the archaeological record and you'll find everyday readers obsessed with far quirkier fare. Take the Maza, a Greek cookbook attributed to a chef named Glaucus of Locri. Its recipes for honey-glazed eel and thyme-infused bread were so coveted that fragments have been found in military barracks and merchant ships, suggesting even soldiers and sailors craved a taste of home. The library likely housed the definitive edition, compiling culinary techniques from Egypt to Persia, with margin notes debating the perfect consistency of garum, the fermented fish sauce that was ancient Rome's answer to ketchup. Then there were the dream manuals, part psychology, part astrology, and entirely addictive. The Wondera Critica of Artemidorus wasn't just a hit, it was the ancient equivalent of a viral self-help book. Scrolls interpreting dreams of falling teeth, bad for business or flying, excellent for romance, circulated widely, often with local scribes adding their own interpretations. A recovered copy from Pompeii includes a frantic handwritten edition. If you dream of a bleeding ox, cancel all sea voyages. These texts weren't mere superstition. They reflected a genuine belief that dreams held coded messages from the gods, and the library's scholars likely debated their meanings alongside treatises on logic and ethics. But nothing outsold the ancient romance novels. Chariton's Calla-Ho, a melodramatic tale of love, pirates, and mistaken identity, was the twilight of its day. Papyrus fragments outnumber surviving copies of Sophocles' plays, found everywhere from Athenian trash heaps to Egyptian burial wrappings. The plot, a beautiful heroine faking her death to escape an arranged marriage, only to be kidnapped by lustful sailors, was so wildly popular it spawned imitations across languages. The library probably preserved the original, complete with marginalia from love-struck readers. Cheras is the worst husband, even more surprising. The Alexander Romance, a fantastical biography of Alexander the Great packed with talking trees and encounters with mermaids. It spread further than any historical text, morphing into Persian, Ethiopic, and medieval European versions, each more embellished than the last. Yet the real dark horse of ancient publishing was the Gynecology of Soranus, a medical guide for women's health that doubled as a marital handbook. Its sections on contraception and childbirth were copied relentlessly, often with crude illustrations added by midwives in the margins. One well-worn fragment found in a Roman villa includes a handwritten remedy for morning sickness involving crushed pearls and rainwater, proof that even the wealthiest matrons relied on Alexandrian scholarship for life's most intimate challenges. What makes these bestsellers so revealing is how they blur the line between high and low culture. The library didn't just cater to elite philosophers. It preserved the text's real people actually used, recipes they cooked from, dreams they worried over, stories they wept through. These weren't just scrolls, they were the DNA of daily life, proving that even in antiquity, the most enduring knowledge wasn't always the loftiest but the most human. Walking through the Library of Alexandria's storage halls, you'd catch more than the scent of papyrus. There was the sharp, resinous aroma of cedar oil wafting from every shelf. This wasn't just for ambience, it was a calculated defense against one of antiquity's stealthiest book killers, the dreaded bookworm. These tiny beetles could reduce a scroll to lacework in months, their larvae feasting on the very glue that held papyrus fibers together. Librarians quickly learned that rubbing cedar oil into scroll wrappers acted like an ancient insecticide, its volatile compounds driving pests away while simultaneously masking the enticing starchy smell of papyrus. The practice was so effective that traces of cedar residue have been found on scroll fragments from Herculaneum to the Dead Sea, evidence of Alexandria's far-reaching influence on preservation techniques. But insects were just one threat in the Mediterranean's climate battleground. Humidity posed an even subtler danger, causing papyrus to swell and contract until ink flaked off like dried mud. The solution, a network of specialized storage jars called bibliothecae, their interiors lined with natron salt to absorb moisture. Scaled like giant honeycomb cells, these terracotta containers kept scrolls suspended on cedarwood dowels, allowing air circulation while shielding them from direct sunlight. Archaeologists have unearthed fragments of these jars near the Serapeum, their walls still bearing faded labels in Greek and Demotic script. Astronomical charts recopy every 12 years, or medical texts inspect for mold biannually. The library didn't just store knowledge, it actively fought entropy through systematic maintenance. The most ingenious strategy, though, was the recopying schedule. Every decade, teams of scribes would methodically work through the collection, prioritizing texts showing signs of wear. Papyrus typically lasts about 200 years under ideal conditions, but Alexandria's scholars stretched that lifespan indefinitely through meticulous duplication. Here's where their standardization genius shone. Instead of simply copying word for word, scribes would sometimes update archaic spellings or clarify ambiguous passages, effectively creating revised editions that kept classics accessible to new generations. A surviving ledger from Oxyrhynchus details this process, noting how Homer's Odyssey had undergone 17 documented revisions by the 1st century BCE, each iteration subtly refining meter and dialect for contemporary readers. Yet the real masterstroke was their fail-safe approach. Master copies of essential works were kept in a climate-controlled inner sanctum, while working copies circulated among scholars. If a scroll became too damaged, librarians could cross-check it against the master, a primitive but effective versioning system. For particularly precious texts like Euclid's Elements, they maintained 3 identical copies in separate locations, a practice that likely saved the work from total oblivion when partial losses occurred. What's startling is how sophisticated these methods were compared to medieval counterparts centuries later. While European monks preserved texts through isolated labor, Alexandria operated an industrial-scale knowledge ecosystem where botany, chemistry, and logistics converged to outwit time itself. The cedar oil, the salt jars, the meticulous recopying, each was a strand in an invisible safety net stretched beneath human memory. Even now, as we digitize crumbling manuscripts, we're repeating their ancient dance with decay, searching for new ways to do what those librarians did so well, make fragile words endure. While the Library of Alexandria shines brightest in history's imagination, it wasn't the only beacon of knowledge lighting the ancient world. Just across the Mediterranean, the Library of Pergamum rose to challenge Alexandria's dominance with a revolutionary innovation: parchment. When the Ptolemies, jealous of Pergamum's growing collection, embargoed papyrus exports to stunt their rivals' growth, Pergamene scholars didn't surrender. They refined an old Anatolian technique, stretching and scraping animal hides into thin, durable sheets far sturdier than brittle papyrus. This wasn't just a workaround, it was a leap forward. Parchment could be folded into early codices written on both sides and survive climates that turned papyrus to dust. Pergamum's collection, housed in a sprawling complex beneath the Temple of Athena, specialized in Athenian philosophy and Zoroastrian texts, becoming a magnet for thinkers exiled from Alexandria's political intrigues. Their rivalry birthed a cultural arms race. While Alexandria hoarded originals, Pergamum sent scribes to memorize and reconstruct texts barred from export, creating an underground network of knowledge smuggling. Far to the north, Antioch's library carved its niche by blending Greek scholarship with Syrian pragmatism. Unlike Alexandria's obsession with preserving the past, Antioch focused on utility. Its scrolls prioritized military engineering, trade routes, and multilingual dictionaries for Silk Road merchants. The library's crown jewel was its Living Atlas, a rotating team of geographers who updated maps in real time as caravan masters reported new paths through the Pamir Mountains or shifts in the Taklamakan Desert's dunes. Their work wasn't locked away. Copies hung in Antioch's bustling agora, turning the city into a navigation hub. But what truly set Antioch apart was its embrace of populism. Where Alexandria restricted access to elite scholars, Antioch's librarians hosted public recitations, translating dense texts into Aramaic for local farmers and craftsmen, an ancient precursor to open-access education. Centuries later, Baghdad's House of Wisdom would eclipse them all in sheer multicultural synthesis. Born from the Abbasid Caliphate's hunger for knowledge, it became a swirling bazaar of languages where Greek, Persian, Indian, and Hebrew texts collided. Scholars like Al-Khwarizmi didn't just preserve Euclid's geometry, they reinvented mathematics with algebra and algorithms. The house's real genius lay in its translation methodology. Teams of Nestorian Christians, Zoroastrian astronomers, and Jewish physicians would debate each sentence's meaning across cultural lenses, producing hybrid works like Ptolemy's Almagest annotated with Sanskrit star lore. Unlike Alexandria's centralized model, Baghdad operated like a startup funding prototypes of water clocks, astrolabes, and even early windmills based on manuscript blueprints. So why does Alexandria overshadow these rivals in our collective memory? Partly scale, its estimated 500,000 scrolls dwarfed Pergamum's 200,000. But more crucially, Alexandria mastered the art of myth-making. The Ptolemies didn't just collect knowledge, they curated its legend, commissioning poets to spin tales of the library's divine origins and staging public spectacles like the Septuagint's miraculous translation. When rivals boasted practical innovations, Alexandria doubled down on grandeur, building the towering pharaoh's lighthouse as a metaphor for enlightenment, or hosting lavish symposia where philosophers debated before crowds of thousands. Its destruction, shrouded in multiple dramatic narratives, Caesar's fire, Christian zealots, Caliph Omar, cemented its status as the fallen titan of antiquity. The others faded not from inferiority, but from Alexandria's unrivaled storytelling, proof that in the battle for immortality, sometimes spectacle outlasts substance. From Carl Sagan's iconic Cosmos series to the dramatic flames engulfing the library in Netflix's Ancient Apocalypse, the Library of Alexandria has become more than a historical institution. It's a cultural touchstone, a metaphor for the fragility of human achievement. Sagan's famous lament over its destruction wasn't just about lost scrolls, it was a warning about the precariousness of enlightenment itself. His haunting narration over a reimagined burning library, the greatest tragedy of the ancient world, cemented the image in modern minds, framing it as a cautionary tale against dogma and short-sightedness. The scene wasn't historically precise, but it didn't need to be. What resonated was the emotion, that visceral ache for what might have been. Fiction latches onto this loss with gripping intensity. Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code spin-off, The Lost Symbol, hinted at a secret vault beneath Alexandria preserving hermetic secrets. Video games like Assassin's Creed Origins let players wander a painstakingly recreated Ptolemaic city, its library glowing with golden light, a digital memorial to what once was. Even children's media taps into the legend. The Magic Tree House series sends its young heroes time traveling to rescue scrolls moments before the flames consume them. These aren't just storytelling devices, they're wish fulfillment, allowing audiences to rewrite history and salvage what was truly lost. But why does this particular library, among so many ancient institutions, haunt us so deeply? Part of its power lies in its duality. It's both real and mythologized. Unlike Atlantis, which exists purely in legend, Alexandria's library left tangible traces. Charred fragments of papyrus, quotes within quotes in surviving texts, the very void where its absence shaped later scholarship. This ambiguity makes it fertile ground for speculation. Netflix's Ancient Apocalypse leans into this, suggesting the library held proof of advanced prehistoric civilizations, while alternate history novels like the Alexandria Link imagine its archives surviving in secret, guarded by shadowy cabals. The deeper truth is that Alexandria represents the ultimate what-if. Every scientific breakthrough, from Newton's calculus to the discovery of DNA, makes us wonder, how much further along might we be if those shelves had endured? The library's ghost lingers in our collective imagination, not just as a relic, but as a mirror reflecting our own anxieties about climate change, digital decay, and the fragility of the systems preserving human knowledge. When a character in Indiana Jones or the librarians races to save some ancient tome, they're channeling that same primal fear. If we don't safeguard wisdom, who will? The Library of Alexandria endures in pop culture because its story isn't finished. It's a question we're still trying to answer. How do we keep the fire from winning next time? The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a collection of scrolls, it was a hall of mirrors reflecting the best and worst of humanity's quest for understanding. Think about it, a single institution housed Aristotle's lost dialogues, blueprints for steam engines 2 millennia ahead of their time, and celestial maps so precise they revealed Earth's wobble in space. Yet this same place also hoarded secrets too dangerous for public eyes, heretical gospels, political scandals, and alchemical formulas that blurred the line between science and magic. Its destruction wasn't a single catastrophic fire, but a slow unraveling of human curiosity choked by zealotry, war, and the quiet decay of neglected manuscripts. Today, we're living in a second Alexandria, a digital universe where every tweet, research paper, and ancient text scan forms our new global library. Wikipedia's crowdsourced knowledge echoes the Mausian's collaborative spirit. Open access journals fulfill the Ptolemy's dream of democratizing learning, and yet the same threats loom: censorship masquerading as moderation, paywalls fencing off wisdom, and the eerie fragility of data that could vanish with a server crash or solar flare. The irony is profound. We've rebuilt the library's vastness, but not yet its safeguards. So here's the real lesson Alexandria whispers across the centuries. Knowledge isn't a trophy to lock away, but a flame to keep burning. Every time you fact-check a rumor, back up a digital archive, or share a forgotten history, you're stitching another thread into humanity's safety net. The librarians of Alexandria fought entropy with cedar oil and scribes. We fight it with encryption and cloud storage. The mission hasn't changed, only the tools have. If you've ever wondered how different our world might be if those halls had survived, imagine what we could still preserve today. Hit subscribe, because history's greatest mysteries aren't just about the past, they're blueprints for safeguarding our future. The next chapter starts with you.